Church for tonight's Mental Health Forum, Weathering the Storm, a dialogue on understanding and healing beyond violence. It is simply awesome to see you here tonight. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Jim Klepper. I'm the Director of Connections and Growth here at Evangel Church, and along with my colleague, Clancy Craven, who is the Associate Director of Connections and Growth in the back, and our Senior Pastor, David Werner. We want to thank you for being present this evening as we gather as a community to learn from one another and gain wisdom and strength from one another on how we can weather the storm of violence in our world together. This is kind of a special night for Evangel as we reconvene forums such as these on the broader topic of mental health issues. This is not something new for us. Prior to COVID-19, we had several forums such as this here at Evangel for the community on issues such as child anxiety and suicide prevention, some of the challenges of navigating social media and the mental health aspects of that. And it struck a chord, it seemed, for many in our community. And we began to build a good attendance toward these forums. We're about to launch our 5th forum in March of 2020. It was on insurance because we were realizing through our previous forums that insurance was very difficult to navigate for many people seeking mental health help. And we had some really powerful speakers lined up. And then, of course, COVID-19 struck and kind of derailed what had been taking place until tonight. So we're back with the first of what we hope will be many compelling and relevant topics with a professional panel of presenters to offer their knowledge and experience, and as well as tangible resources for you to take home with you this evening. Tonight we are here to present to you Weathering the Storm, ongoing violence in our schools and our places of worship. Our gathering places in our community continue to wreak havoc on our sense of safety and security. So how do we weather this storm together? Where do we find hope in the midst of all of this? What resources are available that can help us care for one another and our friends and our family? This is what we are about tonight. The start of the school year got off to a very tragic start here in Minnesota. We are all painfully aware of the Annunciation Catholic School shooting in Minneapolis. I believe it was on the first day of school or near it. And the storm of this violence that we're talking about was getting pretty close to us here in Rochester. Callie Proctor, a parent of a child at Annunciation who survived that shooting, had some profound words for us a month or so after the shooting took place. And she writes, "Last week, my 4-year-old son had a redo on his first week of pre-K. He asked me, 'Mommy, is a bad thing going to happen again?' I told him no, that it was all done now, but a more honest answer might have been, 'I don't know. I hope not.' But things aren't looking so good." Callie went on to write, "Why did this tragedy occur, and why are these incidents multiplying? I don't have the perfect answer," she writes. "Guns, mental illness, but the deeper fuel is a cultural and spiritual unraveling, one that leaves people empty, cut off from the truth, unable to find meaning. Despondency is part of the issue," she said. So here tonight, we are not going to be despondent in the face of this storm, but to be hopeful. Not to sit back and do nothing with all the feelings that we have, but to do something with those feelings. Not to isolate in fear, but to come together as a community to support and learn from one another. Tonight we're here together to move forward in hope. If you would like, would you please pray with me? Heavenly Father, we are so grateful that you have brought us together this evening. We ask you just to be present in our conversations and in our time together, in our sharing. We pray for wisdom, Lord, and we pray for our panelists as they share their knowledge with us. And we just pray that as we come together, we would find strength and unity and oneness in the midst of a sometimes chaotic and troubling world. Lord, thank you for being with us this evening. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Moderating our event this evening is a very good friend of mine, actually, who as a child and a youth called Evangel his home. Evan Hansen is a local author. He wrote the book Into the Wind, and Evan didn't know I was going to do this, so I'm not, he didn't ask me to plug his book, but I got one of the first copies of his book, and I was very honored to do so. It's an awesome book. So Evan is an author. This book is about fighting suicide one step at a time, as he once carried a canoe 313 miles on what he called a portage with a purpose. Evan's also a public speaker and an adventure-based philanthropist. Evan has a big heart for people, and we are very grateful. Evan has helped put this night together and organize this evening. Please join me in welcoming Evan Hansen. Evan.
Thank you, Jim. That was a much longer bio than what I had sent you, but I appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Whether it's one person or 1 million, these topics are still relevant, and they ought to be treated with unity, kindness, care, and reverence. And we are very blessed and fortunate to have a wonderful panel of speakers before us. Each one of them will take about 10 minutes to discuss community violence from their perspective and from their field, and then we will go into about 30 minutes or so of question and answering. Feel free to jot down any questions you have while they are speaking in your folders, and we will try to get to them towards the end. So, our first speaker is Josh Jensen, a graduate of Bethany Lutheran College in 2011 with a BA in psychology. He has worked in the mental health field since in various capacities, including the Minnesota Security Hospital, ARMS Residential Treatment, behavioral health home focusing on mental and physical health, and has been involved in crisis-related work and suicide prevention since 2018. He has previously held roles such as Regional Mobile Crisis Coordinator and Regional Suicide Prevention Coordinator. Josh also has lived experience that includes being impacted by suicide on various levels, being in recovery, and living with mental health diagnoses, all of which have had an influence in choosing to work in the mental health field. Please give a warm welcome to Josh Jensen.
All right, I'm going to see if this clicker is going to work here. All right. So I got about 10 minutes here, and so there's going to be a lot of information, short amount of time. Please forgive me. I have living with anxiety and then also being a caffeine consumer. They don't typically go well together, so I have a hard time sitting still. And also, if I talk real rapid, I apologize. So I'm going to try to intentionally slow things down. But when we look at a crisis, we're all very unique individuals, right? One of us in this room is the most wealthy. That's not me. One of us is the tallest. Definitely not me. Okay, one of us, perhaps the best looking. It's debatable, right? No, my point is that we're all unique individuals, and there might be hallmarks that could indicate a crisis for an individual, but it looks different on an individual basis. And so when we think of a crisis, right, have you guys know who this is? Gizmo, okay, from Gremlins. If you haven't seen it, you've been way too sheltered, all right? So a lot of people assume that when someone's in a crisis, you go from this to this. And that's not necessarily what a crisis looks like. When we define a crisis in its simplest form, it could be a deviation in one's baseline functioning. That doesn't necessarily mean someone is acutely distraught. And I'm going to get into what acute stress may look like in a person. But the biggest thing I want you to really take into consideration is that when someone is experiencing a mental health crisis, it looks different from person to person, with there at times being common factors that may be prevalent, okay? Before I get into some of these warning signs, I want to make note of something here from Columbia University, their psychiatry program, Dr. Raji Gurgis. He said, understand that mental illness as the primary cause of any mass murder, especially mass shooting, is uncommon. Half of all mass shootings are associated with no red flags, no diagnosed mental illness, no substance use, no history of criminality, nothing. They're generally committed by middle-aged men who are responding to a severe and acute stressor. So they're not planned, which makes them very difficult to prevent. This is from 2002 in the research that they've conducted. I'm also going to share here in a little bit when they talk about youth. But some of the things that can contribute, so factors and warning signs, we look at things like trauma. We know that trauma inevitably reshapes the brain, how the brain processes. It impacts the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of our brain that we use to rationalize, problem solve. It can make the amygdala overactive, right? And the amygdala is that little part that engages the freeze, fight, or flight response. We look at desensitization. Unfortunately, we live in a culture that really glorifies violence to some degree. And one of the most common responses when there's a tragedy of some sort is media outlets are doing what? Typically broadcasting on it. It's almost sensationalizing it. We know that skewed perceptions, so the feeling owed by the world, or having a certain degree of hatred or disparage towards a group of individuals. Someone being preoccupied with death or violence. Verbal clues. Now, whether we're talking about self-inflicted harm or violence towards others, there may be warning signs. So if someone is suicidal, they may say something to the effect of, you know what, I just don't see the point of being here anymore. And our initial response is probably going to be something to the effect of, please don't talk like that. Don't say such silly things. But really our job ought to be is to dig a little bit deeper and try to get to the underlying meaning of what that person is truly trying to say. Someone may isolate a little bit more. They may be engaging in substance use. They could experience a lack of interest in previously enjoyable activities. There can also be genetic predisposition. There are certain genetic factors that can influence propensity for violence. If we take, for example, the gene 5-HTT, it's a serotonin transporter, and if someone gets the shortened allele of that, they are more apt to develop an anxiety diagnosis, which is quite fascinating. So that genetics also plays a role into this. Unfortunately, it's the same thing that played into my loss of hair, right? Not necessarily a lifestyle choice. So one of the trainings I facilitate is called QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer. It's a suicide prevention, and this is a model that is taken from that, and this is applicable to what a mental health crisis may look like for individuals. And so typically we have our baseline behavior. Again, baseline functioning is different from person to person. But ultimately, where this initial red dot is, this initial red line right before think about the base of the mountain is what I'll call it. That's an acute stressor. And usually there is not one thing that's going to send someone into a crisis. It's usually the multitude of things that someone has experienced over their lifetime with their occurring an acute stressor of some sort. Think about it as the straw that has broken the camel's back. And as that person continues to enter into a crisis, usually it lasts about approximately 1 to 3 weeks. And again, it's not prescriptive in nature. It's not like someone enters a crisis and like, hey, just hold on there, buddy. 2 more weeks, you're good. Right? It's not how it works. It looks different from person to person. And ideally, we get this person help before they hit the top of the mountain there. And the reason being, once someone gets to the apex of a crisis, this is where the risk for violence increases substantially. This could be self-inflicted violence. So we look at suicide. It could be violence towards someone else, homicide. It could be a suicide murder. In that is what we call the lethal triad at the apex of this mountain. And this is where someone has a great degree of distress. Whatever that may be, it could be a divorce, it could be being fired from a job, it could be feelings of acute persecution. And then the person has access to means. Access to means also increases the risk of violence. And then ultimately, one of the things, it could be, the third component could be something to the effect of substance use. Now, specifically when we look at suicide, we know that about a third of all suicide deaths have a blood alcohol content of 0.08 or greater. But as alluding to what Dr. Gerges had noted in that article, there are oftentimes people who have no history of substance use who may commit these acts. So we look at the risk of violence and when it can increase. And again, I've said a few of these things, but I think it's important to iterate them. Perceived sense of burden. Viewing themselves as a burden, viewing those around them as a burden. Strong emotional feelings towards a group of individuals, especially a sense of superiority, thinking lesser of a particular group. Desensitization towards violence, this could be through the various mediums that we have access to. You think about it, the average person checks their cell phone about 80 times a day, roughly, and that doesn't include the amount of time spent per check. Most of us have access to things like Instagram, music, YouTube, the list goes on. And the more I expose myself to certain topics, what's happening? Think about it as a desensitization. You know, there's a proverb that says, guard your heart in all you do, because from it will determine the course of your life. If I'm consistently exposing myself to things of violence, hatred, this, that, and the other, I'm desensitizing myself. Disorganized thinking. Again, this kind of gets back to the strong emotions, right? We look at cognitive distortions, feeling persecuted. Let me ask you this. Have you ever felt the emotion of rejection despite the fact that no one ever rejected you? My assumption is going to be yes, you've probably experienced that. And it can be a really difficult emotion to handle, especially for our youth. When you think about it, you could never pay me enough to go back to that time of my life. Feeling misunderstood, feeling criticized, feeling as if you're not going to fit in. And then, of course, the acute stressors, whatever that may look like. Now, from that same article, the article is titled, "Is There a Link Between Mental Health and Mass Shootings?" This is where I'm going to talk and touch base on the youth. If we're talking about the mass shooters that we hear most about, such as school shooters and other individuals who commit such public crimes, we have examined a number of these cases and are seeing a pattern. As opposed to most mass shooters, these perpetrators tend to be younger males who are often nihilistic, empty, angry, feel rejected by society. They blame society for the rejection and harbor a strong desire for notoriety. They want to make their mark in the world, that they will elevate them to the status they believe they are entitled to and deserve. So again, we see this idea of rejection, very skewed thinking. Now, it's hard to say if we look at the unfortunate event of what happened at Ascension. I don't know if anyone has seen anything that the perpetrator had done in his journal. Those are warning signs as well. It's our job to be curious, to be inquisitive, but do so through a lens of love and trying to withhold criticism. So how do we de-escalate someone? Well, the first thing to do is, if you're ever in doubt about someone's well-being, check in with them. And try to do so, again, from a perspective of love. We want to listen to understand, not respond. I think it's common experience where we are maybe venting to someone and we receive unsolicited advice, right? When that's not necessarily what we need. Too often we listen to respond, but we really want to listen to understand, to try to dig deep, to understand what suffering may be occurring. We want to withhold judgment. Have you ever felt judged because of something you felt, something that you were told? As soon as we start to judge someone, typically they're going to clam up or become defensive. If you want to de-escalate someone, withhold the judgment. We want to make our concerns known. The thing you said, then phrase it, how you heard it. And this is alarming to me because I'm concerned about you. I don't want anything to happen to you. We want to manage our verbal, paraverbal, and nonverbal. If I go to have a conversation and I'm closed off, I'm just like, yeah, what's going on? Does that seem authentic? Does it seem genuine? Does it seem as if I care? When we think about it, all forms of behavior are communication. It's not just the words I speak. It's also my body language, my cadence, my tone. They all influence or have the capacity to influence how someone is going to receive my message. And then we look at the very last thing. If someone is in the middle of a crisis and they're acting out, and I'm talking about in the midst of extreme violence, the three best things we can do are run, hide, and lastly, fight.
Thank you, Josh. Let's give him a round of applause once again. Up next, we have Helene Spencer, who has a lot of letters after her name, so bear with me here. Don't worry about them? Oh, well, you've earned them. So, DNP, APRN, FNP-C, PMHNP-BC. Whew. All right. She is an assistant professor and coordinator for the Psychiatric Mental Health Nurse Practitioner Program in the Department of Graduate Nursing at Winona State University. She also practices part-time at the PMHNP and the Mayo Clinic. She is passionate about person-centered mental health and preparing future practitioners with the skills to care for others without forgetting to care for themselves. Her research interests focus on service learning, interprofessional collaboration, and simulation. Please welcome Helene Spencer.
Can you hear me without holding the mic, or do I need to? Okay, I will hold it. There we go. Is that better? Wonderful. Well, thank you all for being here and for weathering the cold weather to be here for this difficult conversation. I think when we try to deny or ignore problems like this, we run the risk of perpetuating them. And so I hope that our conversation this evening will be an initial step toward healing these wounds and addressing the violent trends that we're seeing in our communities and in our schools. When we think about schools and universities, we typically think about them as places for exploration, self-development, preparation, and socialization. Yet in recent years, they've also become places associated with violence. Compared to other countries, the U.S. has the highest rate of school shootings, 37 college campus shootings and 27 other school shootings so far in 2025, according to some reports. These tragedies dominate headlines for weeks. That reinforces that fear among students and parents and educators. A 2025 RAND survey found that 43% of principals reported at least one threat to their school in the past 2 years. And beyond shootings, we have bullying, harassment, emotional abuse. All of these things are also pervasive. The American Psychological Association reports that aggression toward educators is on the rise, fueling workplace stress and turnover, and directly impacting the quality of education that our students are receiving. According to the CDC, in 2023, 13% of high school students missed school because they felt unsafe. Policies, rules, and drills are common responses to this. Roughly 95% of schools have implemented some form of active shooter drills, kind of featuring that run, hide, fight. A multi-million-dollar industry, and many states require this. But standardization and adherence to best practices is very inconsistent with this. And research is actually suggesting that these drills that are intended to protect can actually be very emotionally distressing, especially for the very young and also vulnerable populations. Georgia Tech's Social Dynamics and Wellbeing Lab studied the impact of these drills. And one teacher said after a drill, "I can tell you personally, just as an educator, we were not okay. We were in bathrooms crying, shaking, not sleeping for months. The consensus is we are not okay." Violence management is becoming a part of our generation's curriculum. Fear is the motivator, and we are still not okay. While we drill for violence, another killer lurks in the shadows. Stress is a silent killer. It doesn't make the headlines, but it is deadly. Our stress response, that fight or flight or freeze, it's awesome for those acute threats. But when we're constantly on that high alert, the effect is toxic. A brain on high alert struggles with focus, with memory, with problem solving, all these things that are essential for learning. Students learn less when their nervous systems are primed for survival rather than curiosity. Stress impacts sleep. It impacts socialization. How am I going to interact in a healthy way with others when the fire alarms are blaring loudly in my mind? And I'm primed to view my surroundings as potential threats. Also, the more that stress response is activated, the harder it is for the body to come back to that safe baseline, leading to feelings of overwhelm and emotional dysregulation. There's strong evidence to suggest that chronic stress has significant physical health problems, including heart disease, diabetes, substance use, depression, anxiety. The past 10 years have seen rising levels of stress among students and faculty. The American Council on Education reports that 76% of college students experience moderate to severe stress. And this impacts their academic performance, enrollment, and retention. Violence is a part of that picture, but we all know there are other factors at play as well, that financial strain, juggling work and family, crushing college costs, insecure jobs, medical costs, food insecurity, polarized politics, eroding trust in institutions, and these alarmist headlines grabbing our attention while also snatching our sense of security and trust. Overall, we're feeling increasingly threatened and powerless. Our Surgeon General calls youth mental health the defining public health crisis of our time. And part of me wonders, are young people trying to tell us something? Are we all kind of like fish swimming in polluted water? And are they the ones warning us that maybe something isn't right? That the environment that we have created is dehumanizing? And maybe the violence we see is also a wake-up call. Don't just keep swimming. There's something wrong. Psychologist Rollo May argued that beyond stress lies a deeper cultural wound, isolation and dehumanization. And he writes powerfully about how these things increase the risk for violence. And even though it was decades ago that he was writing this, I think it has relevance for today. He writes, impersonality has serious and destructive effects. In New York City, it's not regarded as strange that the anonymous human beings secluded in single-room occupancies are so often connected with violent crime and drug addiction. Not that the anonymous individual in New York is alone. He sees thousands of other people every day, and he knows all the famous personalities as they come via TV into his single room. He knows their names, their smiles, their idiosyncrasies. They bandy about in a we're all friends together mood on the screen, which invites him to join them and subtly assumes that he does join them. He knows them all, but he himself is never known. His smile is unseen. His idiosyncrasies are important to nobody. His name is unknown. He remains a foreigner, pushed on and off the subway by tens of thousands of other anonymous foreigners. There is a deeply depersonalizing tragedy involved in this. His self-doubts, I don't really exist, since I can't affect anyone, eat away at his innards. He lives and breathes and walks in a loneliness which is subtle and insidious. It is not surprising that he gets a gun and trains it on some passerby, also anonymous to him. And it is not surprising that the young men in the streets, who are only anonymous digits in their society, should gang together in violent attacks to make sure their assertion is felt. In spring of 2024, 49% of university students involved in the American Council on Education survey reported feeling lonely. That's half. Another statistic for you, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression survey released around September 2025 found that 34% of college students find it acceptable to use violence to stop a speaker in some circumstances. And so we see how universities transition from spaces of exploration to places of ideological entrenchment. Violence, in many cases, is carried out by people struggling to assert their worth in a culture of chronic fear and stress and isolation, trying to defend this fragile sense of self and prove that they too matter in a world that makes them feel invisible. And I feel the violence that we're seeing in schools reflects deeper cultural wounds of alienation, fear, and dehumanization. So here's this paradox. We equate safety with fortification. More cameras, more locks, more drills. But safety is not just about the absence of threat. It's the presence of care. When schools are entrenched in fear, we lose sight of their purpose, which is to nurture growth, resilience, and community. Safety culture often prioritizes that control over connection, reinforcing isolation and mistrust. And there's a difference between being watched and being understood. So I wonder what would happen if we drilled something else. What if we practiced connection, support, resiliency, and stress management? What if we focused on building cultures of care, not cultures of fear? Violence grows in isolation, despair, and disconnection. I think if we want safer schools, we need to build cultures of care, not cultures of fear. And it starts with you, and it starts with me. Carl Jung wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people." I need to look at myself. I need to self-reflect, to regulate my own stress, to understand my emotions so that I can be present and engaged and helpful, not reacting out of fear, but responding out of love and genuine care. It involves seeing others, putting down the cell phone, smiling, making eye contact, saying hello or hi, as if to also communicate, I see you and you exist. Distress hides in plain sight. Missing class, falling asleep in class, isolation, declining performance, changes in behavior, requests for special considerations, difficulty with memory, motivation, needing frequent clarification on things. We see this in academia. And then in younger people, thinking about irritability, acting out, losing interest. Again, those changes in their baseline functioning. These are all signals. They're whispers of, I'm not okay. And it's important to be looking and listening for that. And then in response, I think remember that even small actions matter. Active listening, as we just heard, goes a long way. Giving someone the gift of your full attention without judgment, giving them space to speak, reflecting first before reacting, being empathetic, trying to understand the person, not just the problem or the behavior or the grade or the late assignment, trying to attune with that other person, with your body language, communicating safety with openness. Making yourself aware of local resources. We're going to cover a lot of those tonight, it looks like. Counseling centers, crisis lines, peer support options. You know, what I've learned is that having resources out there is great, but really having that personal connection, someone who has said, I think this would help you, really helps with that follow-through and connection with those resources. Physical safety is important, but I really think that psychological safety matters too. As educators, I hope we create classrooms where questions are welcomed, where differences invite curiosity rather than contempt, and I hope we can encourage choice and avoid, when possible, more punitive approaches that reinforce that fear. At an institutional level, I hope to see ongoing shifts toward improving resources for mental health, not just surveillance and drills. I hope to see more focus on resilience, stress management, self-care, maybe incorporating that into the curriculum. I hope we also normalize conversations about our mental health struggles or experiences of stress and loneliness. So I don't want to be reductionistic at all. I know there are multiple factors at play here. But at a basic level, I believe that fear isolates and love connects. And if we want to heal the wounds of isolation, fear, dehumanization, we need to transform both our institutions and ourselves. And I think that's a drill worth practicing. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. That was awesome. Next up, we have Jean Valaire, a peace officer in the state of Minnesota since 2004 and has been employed with the Rochester Police Department for 18 years. Jean is currently assigned as a sergeant for the School Resource Unit and has experience with multiple units within the department, including investigations, field training, and SWAT. Please give it up for Jean.
Good evening, folks. Hopefully you can hear me just fine. Thank you, Josh and Helen. You guys covered quite a few different topics of things here. I guess for me on the law enforcement side, trying to talk about a violent event and what targeted violence would look like or what sounds like, what the definition is. A violent event, any event that causes that's caused by an intentional act or a series of intentional acts. Usually the purpose of that is to cause fear and violence. Not only, as I think Josh kind of highlighted a little bit on trauma, something that we don't really think about, the primary trauma and the secondary trauma. That's huge for us in our field because us as law enforcement officers, we deal with trauma say for instance, if you're working a 12-hour shift, you're dealing with different type of events or incidents throughout your whole shift, regardless if it's an actual call or a crisis call or a basic community service call. You're taking a little bit of every single call that you go to with you home. So that multiplies tenfold with folks that don't have to deal with that often. So that secondary trauma goes a long way for us, and we're trying to teach our officers how to deal with that trauma and how to respond better to our community and how do we engage folks. So when we talk about a violent event, we're talking about individuals that are trying to cause death and injury and cause that secondary fear to everyone else. So that's something I kind of want to highlight on a little bit for today. I have some basic data for you on that, and we'll cover that here in a little bit. Targeted violence is not a new phenomenon. You have all these school shootings or mass violence that's occurring throughout the country and overseas. And it's not new, but the frequency is getting worse. It's highlighted more in the news now. But at the same time, what can we do? Things that we're doing like this here today, that's an answer to that. Kind of brings a lot of different folks from different entities together to kind of collaborate on how we respond to these things. How do we help the community? How do we engage people in those conversations? How do we engage people who are down? How do we engage folks and have that conversation and be open with those conversations and have better outcomes? At least for our officers, we do a 40-hour course training, which is a crisis intervention. And every officer that gets hired at our department goes through that. Not only they learn about themselves, the self-awareness piece is huge, but how do you engage folks? How do you build rapport with folks, specifically people who are in a crisis mode? I brought Bailey Zeman with me today. I think she'll kind of highlight a few things. We'll share our time, so I won't take too much of your time. She'll kind of highlight a little bit of what they do on the social work side. We kind of have embedded social workers with our department. So if I go to a call where I'm dealing with someone in crisis and I need someone with a lot more information or a lot more training than I have, then I can call for a social worker to come to that scene and collaborate with me. Be an active listener, listen, kind of engage that person and kind of get to the bottom of it. Now, that's the front end work. The back end work is where you're doing the follow-up, you're doing the check-ins. Just because I had a call with someone a week ago doesn't necessarily mean I won't talk to them or see them again. So that goes along the way. And for me, as a school resource supervisor, I harp that with my officers, and I'm telling it's like, if you deal with that student today, you may deal with them again tomorrow. And I hope that they're around for you to talk to them during graduation. So that's my goal. That's what I try and teach to the guys so that they have the understanding that follow-up piece, that check-in piece that Josh talked about goes a long way. That person feels they're part of the community. Every high school, every school building is a community. So the more engagement we can have for the officers, not necessarily just there for surveillance purposes. They are there to build connections. They are there to build to have that sense of security for the students. They are there to kind of help provide them with that guidance if they have questions about other things, about life, and how we find resources for them. So that piece, I think, goes a long way for us. I'll go back to the targeted violence. You got impulsive, something that can happen. It's a reaction because folks are dealing with so many different things. But social media kind of a driving force behind that. I think Josh kind of highlighted that a little bit. We get desensitized with so many things on TV. I find myself sometimes not watching the news. It's depressing. I want to be positive. I want to have positivity in my life. And a majority of the time when you look at the news, everything is down. I try not to watch very many things that are negative. I want to bring joy and positivity in my life and have my kids have the same response at home. I take pride of trying to teach them how to respond to things when they leave the house, not in a negative way. Don't see things in a negative way. Try and see good in people, but also be aware that there could be other stressors out there. Just because you have it okay at home doesn't necessarily mean it's the same for everyone else. So have that understanding that when you go out, you're there to help and offer some help and assistance to your friends. Also, the targeted violence could be pre-planned. And with that pre-planning phase, that's where we come in. Anytime that someone's pre-planning something, they have to be out. They have to be out and about, checking on things. Any suspicious activity you see, like, report it. It's okay. It's a combination of things. It's not necessarily just one event, one crisis event that someone's going through. All of a sudden they change and it's a crisis, and all of a sudden they're causing serious harm to someone. There's a combination of things. So it could be a number of different topics, a number of different events in their life that brought them to that spot in life to have to cause that kind of violence. The current trends we're seeing, 64% of attackers exhibited some behavior that was a concern of others. So we're talking 64%. That's a high number. So that means someone out there had a clue that something was going on with that person. It needs to be reported. Someone needs to check on them, see what it is that they're going through and why is it that they're exhibiting that behavior. 57% of attackers had their behaviors resulted in others fearing for their safety. So they put someone else at ease, not at ease. So they recognize there is a problem and someone's, hey, something's not right here. I'm fearful for my safety because of this person's behavior. So 57%, that's also a high number in my opinion. Someone could have said and done something. 46% of attackers exhibited changes in their behavior that were observable by others. So some changes have occurred in that person's life. Something has happened. Again, building that community, that trust, that goes a long way. And I think you guys kind of highlighted that a little bit already. Having that check-in period, if you see something that's not going well, check in with that person. Ask those questions. It may not be easy, but a lot of times folks are willing to talk if you're doing it consistently, not just one time. So, but being consistent with your response. For RPD, I kind of highlighted already. For us, we have the 40-hour course that we do where folks are engaged. The officers kind of learn how to effectively read people, how to be that active listener that these folks talk about already, how to be calm, how to deflect, how to diffuse emotions, how to respond to things, how to keep that person down. But also that follow-up piece goes along the way. Always check in on them or get our social workers involved to be involved, to have that follow-up piece. And why is this needed? We talked about this already. Totality of circumstances could be mental health, could be weapons, violent history. The person's on the radar, like we talked about. 57%. Someone had noticed something was wrong. 64%. Noticed that something was wrong with that person. So there could be a combination of things. Social environment. Social media, again, is the biggest driving force behind that. Suspicious activities, again, can also be an indicator. So it's again, if you see something, please say something, or get the person that's an ally that can also pass that message along, if not to us, but to someone that can offer that assistance. So the next thing that we have that we are working through is the behavior threat assessment and management. That's something that's just came out recently here, that we have the behavioral threat assessment team that does that. Keep not so much surveillance, not so much threat, but when someone comes on our radar, we kind of do that deep dive with other entities to kind of get a good understanding of what they're going through and what assistance we can offer and how do we keep track of that. So we can always have that background. So folks that we know are on the radar for us, we'll try and do that assessment and try and gather some more information and see what we can and can't do. What resources are out there, what it is that they're dealing with, what are their gripe, what's the issue as to why they're causing multiple issues for us and out in the community, and get to the bottom of the issue. I think that's probably one of the biggest factors for us. If we can get to the bottom of why they're causing these issues, then we can at least offer that assistance. Okay? And I'm going to have Bailey step up and talk a little bit about our collaboration with the police department. So again, if I'm dealing with a situation out in the community and it involves a crisis or anything else for that fact, we can always have our social workers on hand that could help us kind of guide where we want to take that. All right. Thank you, Bailey. Thank you.
Who is a licensed professional clinical counselor who attended Winona State University to obtain her master's in clinical counseling and addictions. She is currently a clinical supervisor for the Olmsted County Crisis Response Team and co-response program within the Rochester Police Department and the Olmsted County Sheriff's Office. Please welcome Bailey.
Thank you. So I'm going to piggyback kind of off of everything that Sergeant Villier was just talking about. So within my role, my team will respond out to calls with or without law enforcement. We are also the 24/7 crisis line too. So we see a variety of different types of calls that might come into our community for people that are concerned about their loved ones, concerned about some passerby that they've seen, or just even concerned about themselves. And we've seen kind of this uptick in violence and specifically some targeted violence as well. And so one of the things that the community that we have can offer is being able to respond with those law enforcement officers, having a social worker that has that expertise or that area of training into a little bit more depth, and it allows us to have that follow-up component as well. So typically when we see somebody that is struggling to the extent of acting out in a violent manner, we have two different types of individuals or categories that we can put them in. One would be a howler, for example, and then the other is deemed as a hunter. So the howlers are going to be individuals who are really just vocalizing concerns. They might not actually have intention to act on those things, but they're going to be the ones that are very persistent. They might be leaving voicemails, showing up to just vent their frustrations, maybe posting things out on social media, reaching out to anybody and everybody that's able and willing to listen to them. And then on the other side, you have the hunters is the category that they're called. And this is based off of the Association of Threat Assessment Managers. And so within those, the hunters are going to be the people that we have a higher level of concern about. Those are individuals that, like Sergeant Villier referenced, are going to be within that behavioral threat assessment observation or radar. And so those are individuals that we have gotten reports from. And those come from people within the community, people like yourselves. And so see something, say something is always something that we really try to reinforce, because if you don't tell us, we don't know about it. And we can't work to prevent things from happening. And so the main focus of that group is to really look at what we can do to prevent individuals from acting violent. There's typically a pattern of behavior that we're going to see within individuals that would act on something violent. And that's going to be anything from initially starting just to talk about it to, like Sergeant Villier had said, is acting things out, going out and testing their cycle, seeing how far they can get with certain things. And those are those suspicious incidents that we really want people to be observant of, to notice, to talk about, and then to tell that. Don't sit with that yourself, right? Never worry alone is kind of one of the models that we've gone by. Is if you see something, tell somebody about it. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right, and it's okay to talk about those things and being comfortable with things that might be uncomfortable, because that's the way that we can prevent some of these tragedies from happening, or at least lessening the impact of them too. And so really just looking at being aware of what they might do. If you see something suspicious, calling that into law enforcement and talking with them, talking to somebody that maybe you're familiar with the person that's acting a little bit different or unusual, talking to them, asking them if they are okay or what's going on, what they might need to kind of go on a better path. Typically, everybody who's going to act on these things is going to have some sort of grievance. There's a reason behind that, whether it's real or perceived. And so really trying to get down to that root cause of what is going on with that person, what is causing them to feel that this is the path of violence is something that they need to do. And is there something that we can do to intervene in the meantime, whether that's getting them resources, showing them that somebody cares about them, somebody is paying attention to them. And sometimes just those simple things of sitting and listening are enough to divert somebody from acting on those threats of violence. So it really is just kind of having this person-centered approach. Everybody's going to have a different rationale for why they're behaving the way that they are. Again, real or perceived. It may not be based in everybody else's reality, but for that person, that's what's happening. That's their real life. And if we can get down to why is this kind of occurring for them, what is their focus of concern, and how do we get them that support that can be enough to really divert them from that violence. And so within our team, those are things that we can kind of look at, but again, it does start with you. It starts by making those reports, making those calls, talking about things, being comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I can't stress that enough because these are really difficult conversations to have. And so it can be things of they're kind of releasing the stigma of what it is to talk about these things. And it's okay to talk about hard conversations. It's okay to not be okay. It's normal for people to have some really negative and dark thoughts, but how do we move forward from that? And how do we impact that so it doesn't go down a path of violence, that it becomes a path towards recovery and kind of continued healing and hope? And the more that people are willing to have those conversations and reach out, just like tonight, the more likely we are to have a healthier community itself. So, yeah.
Thank you, Bailey. Next up, we have Angie Ellsworth, MS LSW LSC. She is the founder of Time Out Behavior Coaching LLC, where she and her team train and coach parents and teachers in research-based positive behavior strategies to create a calmer and more respectful environment and build healthier relationships. As a wife, parent of 3, and more nearly 30 years as a social worker, school counselor, and behavior coach, Angie understands the challenges happening in the trenches. It's an honor for her now to walk beside the families as their coach and support them in more meaningful and transformative ways. Thank you, Angie.
We'll see if I can get my clicker to work too. Okay, well, that was a great segue from Bailey to talk about how it's important to have conversations. And in my role right now, currently, as a parent coach, we do a lot of coaching around how parents can communicate effectively with their children about all sorts of things. And one of those big things tonight is about how do we still have conversations, those difficult conversations with children and young people, to offer them reassurance and offer them hope especially when we do, as caregivers, send them off into schools and the community and expecting them to be safe and to be able to help them have trust that their community will be a place for them to continue to grow and learn, and that there'll be people around them that care for them and can continue to look out for them and grow together. So when we talk about violence with children, one of the biggest encouragers I can give to all people is to maintain as best of sense of calm in yourself as you can. Despite some of your own nervousness or worry or fear, children really respond to our own behavior around them. They look to their caregivers and the people they love as their security and their stability. So if we start to kind of lose it and we start to kind of freak out about things, children see that and then they start to get concerned because the people that are their rock are starting to crack. And so we really do, as adults, have to try to keep ourselves together as best as possible. And then when we need our coping supports and we need our support people, then we can go find them maybe in a little bit more private space or somewhere else where it's more appropriate. So primarily when we provide a safe, calm environment for our children and our young people to talk about things like this, and we approach it with a calm attitude and a sense of reassurance and a sense of hope, we can ensure that they will be able to cope more effectively as well. When you hear lots of people have talked about adult response to violence and to crisis and to fear and their own emotional response, you may also see that children respond differently too. And if you're providing care to young people, you know them better than almost anyone else in their life. So be mindful if their behaviors are starting to change a little bit, or things start to go out of the ordinary, or maybe there's some things that you're like, you know what? Something's really changed here and I don't know what it is. It could be that they're responding adversely to something that they maybe heard at school or maybe they saw on TV. It doesn't have to be something that happened immediately around them. It could have been something that they heard about a long time ago and it's just now, for some reason, it's coming out sideways in their behavior. So really thinking about the different ways that you know the children that you love and care for and what looks different to them. And it could be, I know a lot of parents tell me, they're like, well, we don't really notice that things change because we're with them every day and it's a little change every day or it's a little change here and there. But when they look back 6-8 months ago, they think, oh my gosh, yes, he's a totally different child. Things are totally different now. What happened? And so sometimes it does take an extra eye or another professional or someone else who is familiar with your child, but maybe doesn't see him every day, to give you another perspective or another opinion on what might be happening with your child or have seen the changes that have happened over a longer period of time. Up here, there are some different age-related differences that may be typical for most children. Again, if you have children in your care or young people that have some different circumstances in their life that they're dealing with or working through, they might have additional behaviors that may increase in frequency or intensity during courses of trauma or stress or crisis. So also be mindful of those. Oftentimes parents will say, oh, well, they're just being kids. They're just acting out. They're just going through a rough time. But opening the door to have that conversation and really be curious about what might be happening with them instead of just them giving you a hard time. Asking yourself instead, what could my child or the person I care about be going through? When you have those conversations, it's really kind of difficult to think about what do I say and how do I say it? Because oftentimes, a lot of times it's uncomfortable to have those conversations, but we also want to be mindful of if we don't know what to say, we also then are not having an opportunity to say anything. So instead of responding out of uncertainty or out of just kind of ignorance, we can say, it just happened once. We don't have to worry about it. If we don't talk about it, it'll go away. And quite honestly, that's not the case with kids, and it's not the case with adults either, is that those experiences still live inside of us, as you've heard, both emotionally and psychologically, that we hang on to those experiences, and our body does too. And so taking some opportunity, I can't really read that screen up there about what those comments are, but I'll read off of this one. So you want to think about when you share information with kids, different ages of kids can only handle so much information, and appropriate information at that. So we want to be sure that whatever message we give to the kids that we love is that it's brief and it's developmentally appropriate. We don't need to tell them all the big scary things about why it's important to keep ourselves safe. We don't have to give them all the details about what happened to scare them into being good. We have to just be appropriate to provide reassurance and hope that there are people and places in place to keep them safe. And we have to keep reminding them about that trust and help them establish that. So for younger children, very general. Sometimes scary things happen in the world. It's my job to keep you safe, and I will do the best I can. If we provide false hope, then we're going to say, oh yeah, everywhere you go, you're going to be safe. And the truth is, we can't guarantee that. And that's the scary part. We can also tell some of our older children, we can validate their feelings and say, yes, it's okay if you feel scared. It's okay if you feel worried or sad about going somewhere. Validating those feelings and then reassuring them, you can always come to me. You can always talk to Mom. I might not know all the answers, but I will sit here and listen. And I'll be able to just tell you that, let's get through it together. And then those teens and even middle-aged children, they have tons of access to social media, so they're already getting a lot of this stuff, even if you think they're not. But recognizing that when they see things over and over again, some children will believe that that's the same event happening again and again, when really we just see it being replayed, but in their mind they can't understand the difference. So reassuring them that this was one event, the people that are in place to keep others safe and respond to help, the helpers are there. This is over. We're seeing it only one time. It's not happening over and over, even if you see it 6 times on the news. And then also encouraging older children to be an agent of change. What can you do? If you see something, say something. If you do have a friend who's worried, reach out to your parent, reach out to another friend or another adult that you trust to share that information. Community is really important when people are struggling, not only in response to their own crisis, but also into how they are handling crises that are happening around them. Safety, practicing those safety skills. It is not a bad idea to even have a safety plan at home, to practice a fire drill at home. Sometimes that knowledge can help build confidence in children and how to respond to crisis. And one of the disabling feelings that people have is when they don't have a plan and when they don't know what to do. So equipping our children with drills can be helpful, but we also have to be mindful. But some children do respond really quite worse to practicing some of those drills. So again, talking through that, trying to prepare your child to say, hey, you know what, today there might be a drill at school, or asking your staff or your school to give you a heads up if that's going to be the case so you can prepare your child. Maybe there's an alternative plan for them, but you're having the conversation, and that's the important part. We also want them to know that for younger, middle-aged children or for teens, if they're ever in a situation where they feel unsafe, where somebody is, again, saying something or doing something, that they know that they have a backup, a way out. When our children were getting into their teens and high school years and going and hanging out with their peers, we kind of had a little code word. We said, obviously our kids call us mom and dad, but if they ever got stuck in a place where they were uncomfortable, they could pretend to call me and then or their dad, and they would call us by our formal names. So maybe my daughter would call and say, oh, Angela, I'm not coming home. I'm having too much fun at this party, Mom. Or she'd say, Angela, why do I have to come home? And she would play that in front of her friends to kind of save face. But when she used my formal name, I knew that that was a sign that she was uncomfortable and I needed to come and get her. But she could save her face in front of her peers and not look like she really wanted to get out of there. So it was our own way to communicate so she could know that she could call or text us whenever there was a situation that she didn't feel comfortable with. Many of these strategies and these practical scripts are in your folder. So to finish, just to foster that sense of belonging and hope. I know after COVID, people are still a little nervous about getting out in the community and even just getting back into a routine of community involvement. But really, that's one of the biggest things I can encourage you all to do is to find a place where you and your family have a sense of belonging in the community. Whether you're volunteering or in a group of a faith community or an activities group or some kind of a group that includes a hobby and joy, finding a place to belong, to volunteer, to get your children out, your young people out into the community and encourage them to build relationships and to become familiar with those people around them that offers additional support, where they know that they have a neighborhood of people that they trust and that they know that they can go to when they do feel a sense of uncertainty, and just the recognition of and familiarity of people in their neighborhood or in their area, their school, their places of work, that offers another sense of reassurance and a sense of hope. So thank you, and we've got some really great resources to share with you.
Thank you, Angie. Next up, we've got our final speaker, Connie Ludke, RNBC. She is a retired nurse manager who worked for Mayo Clinic for 38 years. One of the accomplishments for which she is most proud is helping create the Pediatric Pain Rehabilitation Center to provide care for children, teens, and young adults who are dealing with anxiety, depression, school phobia, and often suicidality in addition to or related to their chronic pain and illness. She has over 20 years' experience working with youth and families and is delighted to be part of this forum tonight. Please welcome Connie.
Well, I am honored to wrap up this session with all of these wonderful speakers. It was a great evening to be with you all and to hear from your perspectives. So thank you for sharing what you did. Boy, what a job for me to have to talk about resources. Where do you start and how can you ever have enough? It's a big job for me to try to do. But I want to take a minute and just talk a little bit about violence. So some of the violence that we've talked about here might be in the broad political sense, or you think about a school shooter. But violence most often occurs at home. We think about domestic violence, spousal abuse. It is very common, much more common than we think, that women and children, most commonly, are subjected to abuse in the home setting. I believe the statistic still stands that 1 out of 3 women will be sexually abused at some time in their life, and 1 out of 6 boys will be sexually abused. This perpetuates the cycle of violence. If you're abused as a child, either physically, sexually, emotionally, if you're traumatized, you're more likely to continue on that cycle. If you don't get healed from that, you don't have healing from that trauma, you're going to go and recreate what you've lived through. So it's helpful to be aware of that. And if you have children that come to you, or even as adults, that they come to you and share that they have been abused, believe them, listen to them, validate their story, and be a resource for them. So my first list on the list here of resources is you. You all, we all, are the first resource. And that's being, as the speakers have all mentioned before, it's being present in our community, having that connection. It might be smiling across the street to your neighbor. It might be saying hi to people that are new in the neighborhood. That connection is so important, and that community involvement. So once you have talked to a person about their abuse or their violence, there are ways that you can help provide safety for them. If a person is suicidal, I'm just kind of jumping around a little bit, but for immediate resources, if they're in a threat for danger for themselves, you can always have them dial 988 in Minnesota. That's a connection to the suicide hotline or a mental health hotline. Of course, 911 if you think somebody is in imminent danger of harming themselves physically, of committing suicide, of acting out, or of a violent act against somebody else. You can also encourage people to talk with their primary health provider. Sometimes if a person is seeming unstable or seeming to be having a propensity towards violence or self-harm, there might be something medically wrong with them. Have them go and see their doctor to make sure that they're physically okay. Primary care providers are also well-versed in treating depression and anxiety and even suicidality. So that can be a number one resource for you. And they then would refer them on to any specialists that they might need, whether it would be a mental health provider or further medical specialists, including counselors. Most communities have a local community mental health center that is available, and they often have sliding fees. COVID did give us the benefit of opening up the internet for us, that we can have better health by connecting with therapists online. You can put in who it is that you're interested in seeing, a male or a female, and what kind of therapy, what kind of approach you're interested in, and they can help you find a therapist, often again on sliding fees. Our friends and our neighbors are important resources. Again, that sense of community and connectedness. The public library, I want to just pull out a couple of brochures here as an example. I do have a number of brochures in the back that you are welcome to take home with you. And our public library is a wonderful resource. They have books that are available. This is a reading list. This is a Teen Reads, and it's a list of books that's related to disability pride. So there are 3 or 4 books that are listed with the pictures on the front, and then several more in the back. So what they are doing here is they're calling out things, whether it's disability and pride, or whether it's depression in teens or anxiety in teens. They're giving them books to read that will have main characters who are struggling with the same issues that they are dealing with. And they're books for them to read, and then resources as well. There is also a yellow book like this that is just a list of names and numbers for our community, and I think that I saw my source bringing some more of those green books. Yes, so we have green books that are available in the back for you, names and numbers and little explanations about what these resources are. So a bunch of paper resources and pamphlets in the back. Feel free to help yourself. Also, we talked about specifically schools. The schools will work with you or with your loved ones to help identify problems and to help find resources for them. They have school counselors that are available and that they can help set up individual plans. And finally, of course, given where we are meeting tonight, places of worship. Wherever it is that you worship or that your communities worship, use them as a resource. Your pastors, your priests, your rabbis, whoever it might be, are very well versed with resources for helping people. So thank you for your attention, and I hope to visit with you in the back when you're picking up some more brochures. Oops.
Thank you, Connie. We're going to move into our time of question and answers. Before we do that, please give all of our presenters one more round of applause. It's always an honor and a privilege to have such a wide variety of perspectives and experience, and they bring a lot to the table, and we are grateful for that. After we go through our question and answer portion of tonight, depending on their schedule, they will be available to speak with you individually, either up front or preferably in the back. Once we are towards the end of our Q&A, Jim will wrap us up with a short little ending, and then we will send you on your way, maybe to see the Northern Lights tonight. So, If you have a question for the entire panel or any individual, please feel free to raise your hand and I will bring the microphone to you. Would anyone like to open us up with a question? Let me see some hands. I don't see any hands, so I will start us off with a question then. Maybe for Josh and Bailey or anyone. Oftentimes it seems that individuals will often reach for crisis resources when they are experiencing suicidal ideations. What do we see in terms of if people are experiencing homicidal ideations or people are inclined to harm others as a result of mental health? Is that something that's been happening recently? How do we address that? I'm just curious.
A lot of the kind of symptoms or warning signs are going to be for homicidality are pretty similar to the suicidality. One of the biggest kind of differences that you may see is somebody who is far from their baseline behavior has kind of been experiencing some differences of what is typical of them, and then might suddenly have this overwhelming sense of peace. So you might see somebody who starts to feel a little bit better, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, they're on the right path, they're feeling okay, I'm not worried about them anymore. And typically that's when you can see somebody that is going to act on those negative thoughts at that point. So that's typically something that people may not think of right away, is this sudden sense of like euphoric type of behaviors and feelings, is just that sense of being at peace. You may also, on the opposite side of things, see somebody be more withdrawn. You might see them start to give away items. You might see them start to kind of shut down, and they may even get to an extent where they finally post something on social media based upon research that's kind of been completed, I guess, throughout the span of the last handful of years especially, is there's usually a very short period of time when somebody posts something publicly before they start acting on it. So in that sense, it's really going to be focusing on kind of that immediate reach out of getting urgent services. Typically, law enforcement is going to be one of those, of calling it in. Don't wait, don't hesitate. A lot of times folks will try to just continuously call that person, and they may not be responding at that point. They might just have kind of cut ties, and so the faster that we can respond from an emergency standpoint, the better off we are at that time.
Thank you very much. All right, I got the first question out of the way. Anyone up for the second question? Okay, I got one over here. Perfect.
How do you respond when a person close to you, so you have a long history with stuff, and all of a sudden they're super rational, where they haven't been super rational for a long time? What can you do to try to get their feelings out, because it seems like they're not really telling you what's really going on?
So first, I'm going to answer your question with a question, just so I have clarification. What you're seeking is to essentially, how do we get someone to open up to us when historically they have been closed off? So I think one of the barriers, at least in my experience, has been is generation contributes to a degree of stoicism, right? There's that adage of pull yourself up by the bootstraps, okay? Which in and of itself doesn't make sense, because if you ever tried that, you're going to be looking at the ground. Now, most people are fearful to open up because they don't want to be judged. That's one of our biggest things. And part of it could be historically they were criticized. One of the things I've done is I have verbalized my concerns. Hey, here's why I'm concerned. You are more closed off, and I've tried to show my love through asking you what's going on, and you definitely haven't opened up, but I want to be able to support you. I want to know what that looks like. Leave it at that. At the end of the day, we can't force anyone to open up. The biggest thing we can do is we can be persistent in our efforts. And persistence is not that idea of, are you okay? What's wrong with you? Do you wish you were dead? At some point, that becomes annoying, right? Persistence is really checking in with that person, again, verbalizing or iterating what your concerns may be and giving that person space. And then checking back in with them. Again, just be like, hey, I just want to let you know I might be beating a dead horse here, but I care about you. I want to be able to support you to the best of my ability. And I'm here for you whenever you're ready. And then just carrying on. You want it to be organic.
I should comment that, most of my work in pain management was actually psychiatric nursing, so it gives me a little more validity as I'm talking here. But in addition to what you're saying, I think sometimes self-disclosure can be helpful, depending on if it's a person that you live with or you know real well, then, they know your history. But sometimes giving just a little bit of the piece of information about what you're observing and then some of your own experience. For instance, I've noticed you're more closed off, or you seem more down and discouraged, or you're more sad, something like that. This is what I'm observing. And then I'm wondering if you might be struggling with some depression or anxiety, or if something else is going on in your life, because I once experienced something like that, and this is how I behaved. So you're observing from them, their behavior, and then you can also share something about your personal walk, or this seems like something else that, a friend of mine was dealing with, and I wonder if you might be experiencing that too. So a couple different options.
Thank you both. Was that helpful? Okay, good. Okay, got another couple over here.
So I was wondering what the best way to parse apart ideation versus true intent, especially when it's the first time meeting with someone, so you don't have the ability to assess whether it's a deviation from their baseline, and if you only have an hour with them, if it's a client, also like whether or not you should report it.
One of the things that really is imperative as far as looking at, is this something I need to report or not, is going to be like that imminent threat. Like, is there something there? Do they have access to the means? Do they have a plan of what they are wanting to do? Are they willing to safety plan? Are they willing to kind of participate in having that conversation with you, or are they closed off saying, I'm not going to tell you anything? And just kind of gauging a little bit, especially if it's the first time, of really trying to continue to open that door to allow them to express what's going on, letting them answer the questions, or leaving room for silence can be really powerful in those moments, because silence is uncomfortable. People are going to fill the gap. And so from a therapeutic standpoint, it really is giving them that space. If you're to ask a question to somebody and expect them to respond in 3 seconds, 5 seconds, even 10 seconds, if you fill that void right away, we're not going to go deep. And so it really is just kind of giving them a little bit of that space in a non-judgmental way of just sitting with it. And then if they do disclose something, really having open-ended questions or statements of, tell me more about that, or this is what you're saying, can you help me understand or give me some clarity for those? So just giving them the power and control. Typically in situations like that, that's what they're lacking, as well as they don't feel in control, and this is a sense that they can have. So assessing again for that imminent risk. Do they have access to things? Have they come close to doing something like this before? Do they have a family history of these sorts of things? Has somebody in their life recently expressed similar things? Has there been things on the news that might be triggering? So really just kind of looking into a variety of different aspects, but again, giving them that room to tell their own story.
Something I just wanted to highlight. I know part of your question was, how do you know you should report this? Something I've heard before, responding to calls. Well, the cops don't do anything. We've reported this many times. No one's done anything. I'm a huge proponent of civil liberties and civil rights. I truly believe we all have a time where we have to step in, we have to step up and look out for each other. Anytime that you feel that there's a need for us to be involved, please call us. I would much rather have an officer go knock, do some type of welfare check to begin that conversation, because that person may not be ready. But when they are, they know we can offer that assistance. So I think for us, a lot of times we kind of lean on that as well. I don't want to violate anyone's rights or force them to do things that they don't want to do. But I also want to engage with that person and have a conversation with them to get an understanding of what they're going through and have a good outcome, or have a resource for them by the time I get there. Maybe they have changed their mind. Maybe they want to talk. But if we're not given that opportunity, then we're not going to be able to open up doors and have that basic conversation. And then once they're ready, then we can have those difficult conversations to give them more resources, or potentially get a good understanding to say, hey, now we're concerned about your welfare. Now we're concerned about your safety. Now we're concerned about your family's safety. We need to take additional steps to make sure you have that help. So hopefully that answered a little bit of questions.
I have one thing to add. Do you guys have something to add down there? So the way you asked the question, it made me think that you may be a mental health care professional. So I think there's a difference between it, maybe not. First of all, I want to clarify for anybody, just asking somebody if they're suicidal or homicidal does not put any ideas into their head. Believe me, if they're suicidal, they've been thinking about it, and you're not going to put the idea in their head. The same with if they're homicidal. So you can always feel free to ask somebody, and most often they want to talk about it. They want to have somebody ask them directly because they're scared. They want to connect. They want help. So then this part gets a little more detailed. If you're a close friend, you might feel comfortable asking these questions, but certainly if you're a mental health professional, I found over the years that just asking somebody if they have access to means or if they've thought about suicide, they'll often be quiet about that, even if you give them time to say something. So after giving them time to respond, I will usually ask them about particular methods that I know are common. So do you have you been stockpiling medications, or do you have access to medications that could be potentially harmful? And then they might say yes or no. And then you ask them even more, have you thought about using a firearm? Do you have access to firearms? So specifically putting these out. Have you thought about taking your vehicle and going for a drive and going over a bridge? And you would be surprised how many times people will be quiet and not say anything until you ask them specifically. And of course, if you're asking them more specifically and they're saying, yes, I have a stockpile of meds, yes, I have access to firearms, I've thought about a knife, and I do have a gas stove, and I've thought about driving a car off the road, that's going to make it much more lethal. They're more potentially to act on that than somebody who cannot articulate a plan. And then you go forward and you ask them, furthermore, what's preventing you from acting on these things? And then usually they'll say things like, well, my faith or my spouse or my kids, I'd never do that to them. So then you're kind of seeing what's the balance between the risk factors and the helpful factors, if you will. And all of that helps make your decision about what a level of risk is for somebody. And I'm sure somebody else has something they want to add to that.
I can say one other thing to consider too is, and it's actually an intervention for people who are having these suicidal thoughts, is to develop a safety plan, engage whether they're able to kind of enter into that process with you. So kind of thinking about, when those thoughts come up, what can you do as like a basic coping strategy that you can do yourself at home? Where's a place you can go to be safe? who are people that you could reach out to talk about this? Who would be professionals that you could reach out to if you're not able to reach out to your normal supports? And also making sure that they're aware of those crisis resources. And that can also be kind of indicative of the level that they're able to engage with that safety planning. Kind of for me, when I'm seeing a patient, I want to, before they leave, I want to make sure that they have kind of that roadmap to keep them safe and that it's kind of validated. I often get family members or people close to them involved as well. I think getting that collateral information really helps too. So we have red flag laws here in Minnesota. So if we have concerns about patients having firearms, we do have to report that to law enforcement as well. So.
Well, I do have a question, but before I ask my question, I would just like to say we are more alike than we are different. We all want love. We want purpose. I would just love to think that this whole world is a big family. How do you treat your family members when they're in crisis? Well, I got involved with Dr. Amit Sood. Oh, I am just enamored. I have a passion for this man. He says the answer is compassion. So my question to you all who live here in Minnesota, in wonderful Rochester, how can we spread compassion? We are #1 hospital, guys. What can we do? Oh, let's go.
I'm going to answer a little bit, and I'm going to give this to whoever else wants to answer. So Dr. Amit Sood is phenomenal. Dr. Amit Sood is phenomenal. And so one of the things, when we look at, we all have this ability to empathize. But empathy at some point becomes a detriment because it actually impacts our own emotional well-being. So what do we do further? We engage in compassion, and compassion is putting empathy into action. That is that display of love. That is feeding those who are hungry. That is listening to those who need an ear. That is doing the random acts of kindness. In doing so with humility, not having that hubris behind any of it. Those are the first steps of demonstrating compassion. And there's a cleanup in aisle 5 right now. I was going somewhere. That must be it for right now. So I'm going to hand this down.
One of the things I think about when I think about compassion is that we have the ability to understand that not everybody has to be on their A game every day, right? Like people have tough times, they go through tough times, they're probably likely trying their best, but sometimes even as adults, we might make comments. Like when you were speaking, it brought me to an example of even my young daughter. At one point, we were going through the drive-thru, and I was sitting there impatiently, like, come on, what's taking so long? It's just one coffee, right? And my young daughter said to me, Mom, I'm sure she's doing the best she can, right? So how can we learn that sense of patience, empathy, understanding from others, and how do we check ourselves when we're responding like that in kind, right? I know I'm not alone when I go to the grocery store and I look at how many people are impatient standing in line to check out, right? Or we want to beep at somebody because they're not going fast enough off the stoplight. Well, it just kind of, I think for me, compassion starts with recognizing my own response to people and things around me and how I can not let that be my first thought about things and move on to my next thought and find some way that we can develop a better understanding that everyone is going through something and we don't know what that is. But we have to be mindful of that and not stop at our first thought and our first maybe biased reaction or our first impulsive negative thought about something based on how I am feeling that day, but maybe based on how someone else is. So putting others before myself.
I just have one sentence to go with this, to approach life with curiosity rather than with judgment. So whatever somebody's going through, approach that with curiosity rather than being quick to judge.
That compassion is a great note to kind of wrap up on. It's a very beautiful thing, a very important thing, and as Josh said, it is that formula of empathy plus action, and talking about a lot of things like the Mayo Clinic and an entire system that is built on care or is supposed to be built on care. I think it's important to remember that the root of care is love, and that while there are many different types of love, someone once said that love is what happens when the feeling stops. So it's taking into account not necessarily our first reaction, but our more self-disciplined secondary reaction that stems out of patience and going a little bit farther out of a pouring out of ourselves, not because we feel like it, but because it is our innate right to be able to pour that out onto others. So thank you all so much for attending. We're going to have Jim wrap us up. Welcome.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming tonight. One of the ways we build this was we were hoping that it would be a night of renewed hope and abundant resources. And as the night went on, thanks to this wonderful panel here, that's what I felt. It just got better and better and better as collectively this group of people have shared with us. Your questions were awesome. For one, I was inspired. I feel better equipped. I took some notes. And also, I feel a sense of comfort. That's the word that came to me. I feel comforted. Having human resources like this available to us to deal with the things that we're dealing with. And then, of course, of all those extra resources out there as well. So this is a beginning of our work in mental health here at Evangel. We didn't know what was going to happen tonight. Post-COVID, 4 or 5 years from the last forums that we had. And so one way we want your help, there's a little card in your folder tonight that's got a QR code that you can scan there. And if you scan that, you'll find more ways that we can help you. There's an evaluation form for tonight's program. It could be everything from, if we do this again, when should we offer it? What should we offer? Those kind of things. As well as if you're willing to leave your email with us, then we can contact you directly when we offer something like this. Again, we won't put you on any mailing list. It would just be for forums such as this. So thank you for coming. Connie pointed out that one of the resources that we have in our community is spiritual resources. And I'm going to call our senior pastor, Pastor David, now to close us tonight now with a prayer. Thanks for coming again. And everyone, I think our resource people will be available in the lobby if you have further questions afterwards. David.
Thank you. I'm going to lead a prayer. God of love, you are compassion, and you care about each one of us, your people. And you hurt when we hurt. You cry when we cry. You hold us when we're scared. You come close when we are confused, when we despair and see no way. You are the way. I pray your blessing upon each of us here tonight, for all of our responders who consistently and reliably share hope with your people, all of us as your responders. Give us your light to share. And make us agents, all of us, of your hope in this world. Hope for ourselves that we can cling and turn to you. And hope for those we are with and around and near. Awaken in us the compassion that is based on your love and is compelled to action. Call us each of us. Lord, I ask for that bold request now to give us each opportunities this week to reach out and as be agents of kindness and love and hope. And help us to see it, those opportunities, to see others, be prompted to act. This is all from you. And we pray in the love that you are. Amen. Amen. Thank you all. Blessings.